We are live. We're gonna wait maybe like 2 minutes or so and wait for people to sort of log in, and then we'll promptly get started. If you guys can hear me, please send a hi on the chat so that we can know that you can hear us from our side. Whoever is on time and eager. Can you still hear me clearly? Feedback? Are you still hearing feedback? Yes?
There's some static when you speak.
Hmm. Let's see if this works better.
My friend Mike just joined from Los Angeles. Hi, Mike. I seem to be struggling with my sound now. We can hear you, Dr. Joy.
Great. Well, I think let me just formally welcome everybody that's on and to get us started, because we have quite a eager panel who's going to give us quite a holistic view on our topic for today. So we're talking everything well-being, and I love how our title and topic for today's conversation also just came about in one of our briefing sessions, and we were talking about fuel, which made us really look at how well-being, or rather fuel, can be quite a great sort of perspective on viewing well-being as an important and crucial element of life, perhaps even the source and vitality of all life. And I love that I've brought a quite an experienced panel, quite a diverse panel in front of us today to unpack what this looks like if we were to reimagine well-being as fuel. What would that look like? And before we go into that topic and we introduce the speakers, today, obviously, the thing that, or the event rather, that's brought us together is that of Madiba's vision. Madiba was a servant leader, and even many years after his death, he's mobilized the globe, particularly in the African parts of our world, to still steward some of the things that he was passionate about, such as courage and joy. And I think all of those qualities of leading really comes from a state of well-being, a state of good well-being and a state of healing. And Jennifer, is Jennifer on the line? Jennifer is our apprentice at the Nomalanga Tribe, and it's actually this is her brainchild. And I love just how anybody at the tribe can come up with an idea, and we can really rally around it and figure out what we could do with it and make it really relevant, not just for ourselves, but something that can be a public conversation. And it was quite timely and necessary that we have this conversation today. Jennifer, are you on the line to tell the guest a little bit more about our day today? Maybe not. While Jennifer is getting online, let me introduce our panel for today, starting with Ubongeka Mhlongo. Ubongeka is author of Thinking in Full Color, and which is her first book. It came out, I think it's been a year now. We are celebrating its year anniversary in a month's time. And we're excited to just kind of have her bring to the panel her perspective on full color thinking, which is really about moving beyond binary black and white thinking and really expanding our views of anything that we look at and seeing how colorful and enriched the lens can actually be. So welcome, Bongeka. And then we have Pepelani Zondi. Pepelani is a counseling psychologist, and he is dialing from Durban today. And in addition to being a psychologist who's running his own practice in Durban, Pepelani is a motivational speaker and a poet. I love mentioning that part of it because I feel as if the process of a healer comes very close also to just being a creative and expressing yourself as well. In fact, a lot of the people on this panel are quite multi-skilled and talented, which I really love. He brings in very one-on-one sort of wellness issues and challenges to the forefront and brings quite an interesting perspective, which we don't often hear, which is really about happifying your life when it comes to well-being. So instead of kind of seeing happiness as something to achieve somewhere in the future, how about using that approach to just approach life and fuel your sort of well-being, which I think he'll bring to the forefront when we delve deeper in the topics. And then we have Dr. Stanley also that's on the line. I'm quite privileged to work with Dr. Stanley in a lot of our transformation work as well, holding space for facilitation. But Dr. Stanley is a counseling psychologist and also has many years in organizational work, heading up a lot of the human capital work in corporate spaces in South Africa, but also has worked beyond that in Africa and abroad, just particularly in the not-profit space, which is a very interesting sort of context to also bring in the panel because he has both non-profit, for-profit, and global and local perspective to the panel. And then we have Dr. Nourishing, and Nourishing is joining us from Southern California, and she's joining us today, particularly because we've had many conversations about wellness, and I've walked the personal journey with Noosh around well-being and owning that and embodying that, which has played a very crucial role in my own sort of healing journey, particularly when we lived in the US together a couple of years ago. And all of those lessons now are coming kind of full circle to me many years later. We had Noosh present at our SAYOPSA conference last year on the topic of being wellness. And I just thought that that perspective could be quite interesting in looking at well-being as a fuel, but something that you can have sort of control over and not something that's not external to who we are. And then we have Dr. Monet Buchner. No, have I introduced you, Monet? Not. We have Dr. Monet Buchner that's dialing in from New Zealand. Dr. Monet is South African, and we've also just worked together quite a bit. Maybe it's been a decade now, if I'm not mistaken. And he just was one of my first teachers of just holistic wellness before I even knew what it was. We did a lot of psychology work. And what we found even back then is that when you sit with the leader one on one, the issues that they have are very everyday issues that circle around trying to be well and showing up in our best sort of self. So I love that, a decade later, we can bring in his perspective, both as an organizational psychologist, but also it with his clinical background.
Sorry, Joy. It's a counseling psychology background, but in clinical practice.
Right. And he has the advantage of like both these contexts in terms of the health industry specifically, but also the organizational sort of space. But in essence, well-being is a global phenomenon. And I love that, with his recent work in New Zealand, he can bring in some different perspective also to the fore in collaboration with just the knowledge that we already have. So I want to hand over to Jennifer to just give us a intro of who she is. She's our tribe apprentice, very new, very fresh out of the box, but well in it. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done to just make this day a reality. And perhaps it makes a lot of sense if I invite you to just share a little bit about Mandela Day and the 67 Minutes Initiative. Jen, over to you.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Hi. Let me see if I can turn on my camera as well. There we go. Evening, ladies and gents, boys and girls, friends and family, all protocols observed. My name is Jennifer Dube, and a warm welcome once again. And thank you for taking the time to join us and participating in our very first 67 Minutes initiative as one of the many things that we care about as Tribe Nomalanga. As we all know, Nelson Mandela inspired the idea of Mandela Day at his 90th birthday celebrations in Hyde Park, London. And that day he said, "It is time for new hands to lift the burden. It is in your hands now." So, this idea is that everyone has the ability to make an impact and do something in their own way to change the world and the world of those around them. So, Asikulume Let's Talk is a platform 100% inspired by this notion, and our tribe of healers have gathered here tonight to share their reimagined statements around wellness. So let me not waste any more time. Joy, I think you can take it away from here.
Great. Yes, Jen has mentioned that we'll be busting some myths around wellness and well-being today, and each um, panelist will be just tackling an element of those myths. But before I just state them and dive into, there's a quote that Dr. Noosh sent to me actually a few minutes ago, and I just thought it would be so fitting to just also bring that element of healing and reconciliation in the conversation, the broader conversation of well-being, because I think restoration from a collective perspective and collective healing connects quite directly to self and individual healing as well. And that sort of element is quite key and embedded in even our why statement as the Nomalanga Tribe, where we're about co-creating healthier inner and outer worlds so that we holistically and collectively thrive, but not just for this generation, considering the next generation as well. And we found that quite critical, just considering the microwave sort of generation that we're in, where we want really quick things and we think very like here and now. It's important to do the here and now, but also to look at or to have the lens and understanding that as I heal myself, I'm actually healing my ancestors, and I'm actually healing also the future generation and the people around me. Hence, us being called also a tribe of healers. It's not only for an outward focus, but as we engage in a space, we collectively as healers and heal ourselves as well. So this quote from Mandela says, Mandela's ability to lead the country through a healing process of reconciliation and hope had less to do with his content knowledge, having never been to leadership training, and more to do with his ability to take an extremely volatile and complex situation and create a higher meaning out of it for his countrymen and women. This is the path of a highly developed mind. Mandela perfectly embodied Einstein's quote that we cannot solve our current problems from the same level of consciousness used to create them. The problem of apartheid has been created from one level of development, and its resolution required a leader who can think and act from a level above it. And for me, that even runs true when thinking about the problem of well-being, which is something that is quite spoken about holistically, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, etc. I think that an inward view of it definitely connects, as I said, to the outward view. And I feel as if as we reconcile with ourselves, which is the process of aligning and healing, it makes it almost logical and easier to connect with the people around us and reconcile with them as well. So,
I just wanted to add the quote is by one of our preeminent researchers, Nick Petrie, in one of his very pivotal articles called The Future of Leadership. And I love that he uses the example of Nelson Mandela to make the case for vertical leadership development. Thank you for reading that.
I think it was a perfect kind of segue into our conversation today, particularly just bringing in a local sort of perspective to it. It's not necessarily about Mandela the man, but the spirits in which he embodies around how we show up. So the 5 myths that we're gonna bust today, that Ubongela, Pepelani, Monet, Stan, and Mish will help me with, are as follows. The first one is well-being is mainly about managing illness, right? The second one is well-being is something external to me. It's something I need to achieve. Thirdly, there is a set way to heal, right? Number 4, wellness matters at work when things go wrong, right? And then lastly, some wellness challenges are more important than others, so when we try and compare who's more well or sicker than the other, and that's the myth that we're trying to bust with Epepelani. But to kick us off, I think it's important to take a step back, actually, and I think Stanley can start us off here with just looking at if our view and perspective of well-being has shifted over the years.
Right, Joy. It certainly has shifted over the years. I hope you can hear me okay. Thanks. Yeah. I want to talk about the shifts also in relation to my story as a psychologist, and in a way it parallels some of the shifts I've experienced in the South African context, especially. I graduated from University of Durban Westville as a counseling psychologist, which was a designated Indian university during apartheid years. I started my internship as a psychologist at Spoornet, which is part of the Transnet group, previously known as South African Railways and Harbours. I'm mentioning all this very specifically because it does lead to how we understand wellness transition in the South African context, which is very much, in my view, linked also to our socio-political change. And so that's the thread that I want to bring through in walking through some of the changes. So I worked initially as a organizational psychologist, audit specialist, and then as a HR director.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to contextualize some of the shifts of the last maybe 3, even 4 decades in this context. And I like the way you started, Joy and Nush, with the quotation and the context around Mandela and the collective trauma that we come from as South Africans. So that very much is the underlying context of wellness in the South African context. So we start in the 80s, which would be the first period for me, earlier than when I started work. But then we're talking about EAP, employee assistance programs.
Yeah.
And in the South African context, and it might not be very dissimilar in the international context, for the South African context, this was very much a social welfare program in the workplace and primarily for white employees. There was a very selected beneficiary group at that stage. And it was aimed with a very specific focus of treatment for staff that were struggling with alcohol and drug addiction. So that was pretty much focused. It was kind of an embarrassment for organizations, very low key. The model was in-house coordinator, often found within the training department. It was part of the HR remit. When we get to the second phase, if you like, in the South African context, and even internationally, which the early 90s, we're talking about EAP plus, I would say EAP plus. So in South Africa, we experience our political transition. More blacks are now in administration and middle management. We introduce affirmative action for black advancement. And we enter into this 94 period, which is the dream of our rainbow nation in South Africa. And so we notice then a shift in EAP programs from drug and alcohol treatment to facing the reality of HIV/AIDS in the workplace.
Okay.
Now, this problem was always there, but because the majority of black workers were not in the line of sight in terms of receiving assistance, it was not a consideration. And we know in the time in the 80s and 90s, the scourge of HIV/AIDS in the workplace with a lot of laborers, especially in the mining industry, literally dying in hundreds. And once they were out of the workplace, they were not the responsibility of corporates anymore. And so there was this move of understanding EAP now not just for the benefit of a few employees, but as a corporate social responsibility.
Okay.
So from that point on, it became very much a part of union negotiations. It was a worker right, a union demand. And so there was a shifting in terms of a moral responsibility for health and wellness from just a few to now taking responsibility for more South Africans. Then we enter the early 2000s, where we have another shift, in my view, from EAPs, employee assistance programs, to employee well-being programs, EWPs. And so we move from our understanding of health as a problem to be fixed to an understanding of health promotion. And so now we're not only focusing on physical illness. In this time, there was an increasing interest in exercise, in nutrition, in financial literacy. A lot of companies would set up little gyms in the workplace. And then we have sports clubs being sponsored and a lot of that. And so in this time, the model also shifts from being just one coordinator. It now becomes embedded in the organization. There's a lot more education, training, awareness. It's not as clandestine as it was before. Also in this time, there was an increasing outsourcing of provision for wellness. So we have the private wellness providers that are coming up. And in South Africa, there were 2 or 3, like the likes of ICAS, that start to serve a lot of the companies. And then 2015 to 2022, in this period that we're in now, we're now moving from well-being to work life in a broader context. So we have a more integrated approach to wellness. We're not only solving a productivity problem, but we're thinking about wellness more proactively. And from an HR perspective, wellness is now integral to talent management. It's a key indicator of employee engagement. It is an employee value proposition. New employees are asking companies what their wellness strategies are, what's on the offering in terms of wellness. And it's also an indicator of organizational health and corporate culture. So it's really moving from the individual to a more organizational perspective. We're also experiencing wellness as being at the heart of inclusion, belonging, and team effectiveness. So it's going into that DEI space, as we call it. I also noticed that there's a shifting in the locus of control from a more paternalistic approach where the company took care of you. In South African context, just a few. And now it's employees that are also participating. This is what we want. This is how we want to be engaged in wellness. So there's a partnership that is developing. And there's also an increasing shift from a more medical model to a strengths-based approach. And we're learning a lot more from positive psychology in terms of our wellness. So I'm noticing that there's a shift from physical wellness to psychological wellness. And the COVID pandemic has really also opened up the space for a greater and increasing awareness around mental health. And it's increasingly less of a taboo topic as it might have been even 2 years ago. So I think we've made great progress over the last 4 decades. And if you allow me, I think there's still, if we look into the next decade, I still see there's some opportunities for us in rethinking wellness. So there's a few things I just want to, yeah.
Let me get back to that near the end, because I do want to
Great.
at the future and where to from here. But I wanted to take a and double click on what you said earlier around the individual taking more control over their well-being, which is a shift that I've also seen is necessary, as opposed to waiting for someone to or an external party to come save you, if I may put it that way. And I mean, we can have this debate later on about who should take the responsibility and how do we share it. But before I enter a system, whether it's an organization I work for, etc., I come as an individual already with my own sort of issues and challenges around wellness. And I think I wanted Pepelani to give us a view in the last 2 years, particularly when looking at the added element of COVID and all the resultant issues around that. What have you seen, Pepe, in your sort of practice around the challenges that people are now bringing to the forth, and how are you sort of approaching it differently this time around when looking at just the last 2 years or so?
Thank you for the opportunity, Joy. Perhaps let me start with what I would normally see even before the COVID um, times. It would be your simple general stress-related and depressive issues that people come with that mostly would relate to relationships, family, finances, um, yeah, it's mostly relationships, family, finances, and also issues of development. Where am I in terms of my growth, my development? Um, as people are starting to become more and more concerned about their success and how they are doing in life when they view their lives and worry. For an example, the big question I would ask, what brings you here? The person would answer the question and say, I feel stuck. You know, someone may even say something as interesting as, I'm not really sure why I'm here, but I think I wanted to come and talk to someone. And you would find that people are just looking for a sense of balance, a sense of groundedness. And it's very interesting that I usually see people around the ages of um, 30 to 45. Um, it looks like that time, especially
Right.
2035, is where people are starting to ask themselves the big questions of life, you know, that relate to them looking for a sense of meaning, a sense of direction, you know. Um, yeah, and when COVID came in, it was interesting for me to see that I could actually do online counseling. I'm very I take time to change, you know, to do things in a new way. I'm very a little bit more structured. So I used to frown upon the idea of online.
Oh, we just lost Pepelani.
So sorry about that. Yeah, I found that I really enjoyed the online space. I feel that there's a lot that we can do in terms of wellness in the online space. So I've seen a lot of an increase of clients are looking for online counseling, and obviously there was a lot of grief cases that I would see during COVID times. Yeah.
And Pepelani, is one grief bigger than the other grief?
Grief can be very complicated, and you really cannot you cannot compare it. You know, it's what really one goes through, and it cannot be bigger than the other. You know, you would find that some people would have lost both parents. You know, someone may have lost a partner, a daughter, a son. So you can't say the other one is bigger than the other. Yeah, but yeah, you know, people and people go through it in 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 different ways, you know. And I think what fascinates me mostly about grief is that the textbook kind of stages are not always what the textbook says. They
Yeah,
are
yeah,
how the person presents, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
once you're in the moment with a person, it really can, in one day, have like 5 seasons. I know myself in my journey of grief and how just not linear the process is, in terms of healing that. So then how does your sort of happify your life approach helps in like applying that sort of line of thinking with the clients that you work with? How has it been received? Firstly, tell the people what it is, and secondly, how has it been received with your clients?
Yeah. Before I did psychology, I was very much interested in how people go through difficult times and emerge, victoriously. And I was more interested in resilience. And I had a lot of what you would call existential questions that I thought psychology would answer. So um, then I went to do psychology, trying to answer the sort of big questions of life for myself and for other people. And of course, I found that psychology did not actually give me the answers to the big existential questions.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was disappointed. So I learned a lot about mental illness. I learned a lot about pathology. But for me, I was more interested in what how can people use psychology to make their lives more fulfilling, more rewarding, more better, and almost like what Jim Rohn saying you don't have to be sick to get better. I didn't have the term for it until I got to university and realized that there is something called positive psychology,
Right.
and I didn't even have not a single lecture on that. There was none, you know. And so I picked through the interest that I had to, sort of read about the components of well-being, you know. Before we diagnose people as having certain symptoms of illness,
Mm,
what are the components um, of well-being? What I call in isiZulu izinsika zempilonhle. Uh,
mhm,
Basically saying the infrastructure of well-being. I think through my assumption of what are those, I tend to then help the clients to direct them towards that sort of directions, which mainly that people are seeking to find really a sense of meaning,
mm,
a
mm,
sense of purpose in their lives,
mm,
a sense of direction, and a sense of connectedness.
mm,
Connectedness to what? Connectedness to life, connectedness to the other, and connectedness to the family. Which is why you would find young adults coming in with the issue uh, with sort of childhood neglect
mhm, mhm,
that comes from the upbringing, and they usually have a sense of shame in how to communicate that to the other person, because
mm,
people don't come in and say, a 40-year-old or a 35-year-old won't come in and say, you know what, have never received love at home. I don't know
mhm,
what that means. People don't come and say it like that, but you would then pick it up how it manifests in adulthood, you know.
mm,
And also the issue of a young black middle class who have a burden to take care of family, home. The study by Sanlam, they would call them the sandwich generation. You have your own family, but you are taking care of your mother, your dad, and some of your nephews, and all of that. And I've coined that the breadwinner fatigue.
Ooh.
So I've been seeing a lot of that, where people are caught up between feeling like this is an obligation, but feeling like, what can I do? Everybody's
Yeah.
looking up to me to play that role, and the difficulty to sort of find balance there.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
And you're right.
And
That, go ahead.
yeah, and I was saying, of late, I've been sitting down and reflecting on the work that I have been doing. So I've been trying to compile what I call the 20 PowerPoints of happiness, which simply are just 20 points of how to be happy, or of suggestions and activities that one can do to feel more happier. And I've realized that it's been a while for me thinking about them, and it's been a while for me having compiled them, and they've been sitting there. The reason why they have been sitting there is because I feel like they are too simplistic and too basic, honestly. For an example, there is one that says "Pumela emnyango" every day. Consciously get out of the house. That is an instruction to feeling more happier and well-being when you intentionally get out of the house, whether you are taking a walk, whether you are just getting out of the house, because you have never been out of the house. When you get out of the house, into your car, drive to work, and get to your office, and then from your office to your car and to home, you haven't been outside. So it's sort of like being mindful, taking a
No,
pause. Yeah.
I love those like really tangible and for me even simple sort of micro steps like that, because I think that's the starting point, and I think Unush will expand even more on some of like those points of embodying wellness in the most simple and most tangible of ways. What you've touched on, which I really like, and it connects to what Stanley has mentioned, and what I'm hearing is that there has been sort of a shift from external to internal focus in terms of well-being, and there has been a shift in terms of looking at or focusing on well-being purely for the sake of managing illness, as opposed to proactively looking at it as a power and as a vitality of life in general. And I love how the newer sciences and approaches, like, and I'm talking 20 years or so ago, like positive psychology or even longer, are helping us in terms of just take what or rather Pepelane, what you felt was missing from the psychology sort of fraternity, and including and being expansive in our approaches. And the one person that I can rely on usually for those sorts of things is Dr. Monet, who's on the line today. And I suppose I'd like for us for us to hear from you, Monet, in terms of, in making that shift, what immediately changes when you start looking at well-being as fuel, and raising its importance in our lives, as opposed to something that you think about as an afterthought, right? Because I mean, if we did that, how many of us would be on the side of the road with empty car tanks because we didn't look at how full our tank was in terms of fuel, right? And I think that's the sort of way in which I want us to look at this topic, and to look at the shift. That Monet, are there any sort of useful mindsets, useful approaches that can help us to like further learn how to step into sort of this new reality and embodiment of wellness?
Thank you, Joy. You're asking me such a Just like Pepe said, it's more complicated than meets the eye. But I was coming from a private practice where I worked with ritual abuse for a few years, and then moving into corporate, where you work with a different form of ritual abuse. I think Stanley would attest for that. And then growing up in South Africa for half my life pre-apartheid and half my life post-apartheid,
Right.
I think I've seen quite a set of things. And now working in New Zealand with disenfranchised groups, the very bluest of blue collar, white collar, and then the no collar, which is what the new generation probably can be called.
Yeah.
And also the Maori tribal community, which is very disenfranchised, although they're woven into community in some symbolism. They're a minority group. And we've got a very diverse group of people in a much smaller microcosm, which gives me quite a lot of exposure to what are those basic fundamentals, those conceptual things that seems to relate across people. So between my Samoans, Chinese, South Africans in New Zealand, as well as the Kiwi New Zealanders that are probably Scottish, Irish, Scandinavian, Swedish, and you can name them all. You'll find them here. And we connect on a farming platform, which most of us are farmers. And it's a wonderful opportunity to see what really makes people tick. So most of my clients present with pain, fundamental and chronic pain they call CRIPS, and as well as concussion, and then quite a few in correctional services that present with PTSD, post-traumatic stress. So those are my most critical clients, and then I have some of the other clinical syndromes. But the things that keep on popping up is, on the one hand, people feeling completely lost in time and space because of, I call it the happiness trap. So there seems to be a mantra, almost an idea that if you're not happy, there must be something wrong with you. And people are so perplexed with this, not being comfortable in their own skin or not feeling safe because they are not happy, and really struggling with this concept of happiness, that I realized that if we work with people from the point of view of attainment, then the biggest problem I'm sitting with is we're not addressing their core sense of what is needed for day-to-day well-being. And if I say day-to-day well-being, it's a constant, just the way you breathe, just the way you eat, just the way you go to the bathroom because you just have to. This is a much safer approach to being healthy. And I almost reframed it in practice. I do about 8 to 12 hours a day on therapeutic practice. And it's more, how do you create a sense of safety and belonging on the one hand? And by doing that, the rest will happen. And then on the other hand, seeing, and I like the word responsibility being thrown around in the tribe. But if you really look at what's meant with the responsibility, it's the ability to respond. That means, do you have the ability to regulate, to generate, to restore, and to connect? And you'll find that the people get so entangled in the complexities of life that they don't have that ability anymore. And the way we respond to them not having the ability is to try and give them these pocket of skills, which they're also not able to respond to. So the most profound thing for my clients, they know what to do. But every week when I see them, they haven't done it, which is quite a powerful concept. So it's almost, do they have the ability to respond? Or are they just so overwhelmed, they're just waiting for it to go away? So I don't know where happiness falls into that as a stroker or a stumbling block, but I found happiness as a concept not being useful because they fundamentally don't feel safe or have a sense of belonging. And my whole approach was, how do we create that ability to regulate, generate, and restore? And I've been finding much more power in the concept of mind-brain and some work of Porges' polyvagal theory, just the way the nervous system and the primal brain response to the environment. And we're doing a lot of ACT, CBT, polyvagal work. And I think in South Africa, a lot of work is done in heart math, and some of you might know about heart math. It's just basic techniques to restore resilience and to allow the body. And I think when Jennifer started, she said everybody has the ability. It's almost taking it from Nelson Mandela. The ability is in there, but how do you untangle it and develop it and mature it in such a way that the person remains safe or finds that internal safety? And I'm doing a lot of heart math work, a lot of polyvagal work, and
So
then
for
work.
people, what can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, let me make it really practical. So from a heart math perspective, the moment you breathe correctly and you spend your time breathing correctly, that means spending time in the here and now with breath. Any practice that brings you into the here and now with breath, and that might be prayer, that might be a ritual, is incredibly powerful. And that should happen daily, not when you feel ill, not as a response to illness.
Right.
Almost as a cleansing practice to make you able to respond to your environment and the people around you.
I can definitely agree with that. Yeah. It's just a personal perspective. The moment I meditated 3 years ago, almost every day, it just changed my whole perspective and outlook of life. I just became more clearer. But what I found though, and maybe you can answer this, and maybe somebody else has this issue, is that when you are going through like the most in your life, it is even more harder to actually kind of discipline yourself to that sort of practice as well.
Yes. Also remember when I work with clients, they need something tangible. So I found that things like cognitive behavioral therapy is not that useful. It just remains in that thinking space, and people feel a bit so overwhelmed. And then we talk about goals and stuff. And then realize if you move from the mind-brain position, which is somewhere between the mind and the brain, and you really see you laughing, Troy. I found that
frankness.
Yeah, if you just start from a point where people can feel safe, either by having control over what they can do in the moment, the rest almost happens automatically. For instance, ecosystemically, if you purely just connect, by just connecting, things might happen. And wondrous things happen, either connecting to people or your values or the bigger system. And if we just make people more connectable, the sense of belonging will happen automatically. If people can just feel safer in themselves, they will connect automatically. So through breath and daily ritual, and I physically have a tick list. People will call me like yesterday, it's very dark in New Zealand. I don't know if we should be only growing mushrooms, but it's incredibly dark, mostly. A lot of cloud cover, No wonder they lost the rugby over the weekend against the Irish, And there's now this existential depression in New Zealand. So it was very good to see South Africa beat somebody in that world. But anyway, so I'm working with this and realizing the more people do day-to-day practice, and I take them through their list. They call me and they say they're feeling very down today. And the words in New Zealand would be, I'm excessively, overwhelmingly depressed.
Okay.
I can't find my keys. So you get this exaggeration.
Okay.
And we need to work in the space of exaggeration. And then when I take them through their list of day-to-day activities, they have done none of it. And then we just go through the list and they start doing some of it. And the most wondrous things start happening.
Yeah.
And that just made me realize if you can just keep on connecting, do your day-to-day work, the rest will happen automatically. And of course, it can get more complex with all the brain-based systems we have. But there's some really good work, and a lot of us in psychology practice, I think, would appreciate that.
I love that you've brought in like grounding, and that's quite an embodied practice. And I think it's a great segue to Nushin touching on being wellness. When I was also just thinking about this concept and I was talking to the tribe of healers, Dr. Sfiso Shabang isn't with us today, but I stole his statement that says, there's so much more right with us. And that was kind of his philosophy and what he found when kind of looking at his clientele in Swaziland, which is where he's based. And I thought that that's quite a nice kind of shift in just mindset in looking at how well we are already, and that it's just a matter of finding something that's already there. And Noosh, I don't know if you can give us some tangible sort of pointers on how do we embody this wellness, like from an everyday person that doesn't know a lot about a lot, but knows that I want to be well and I want to tap into that oasis, which is me. How do we embody wellness and our wellness in the spaces that we show up in?
Well, thank you so much for asking. And I've been taking notes on what everybody's saying and your amazing work in the world. Just so inspired by it. Honestly, it's really the groundbreaking work in neuroscience these past few years have really helped us understand the power or what's really in our brain and what is really behind all these experiences of anxiety, depression, or what we even mean by emotional intelligence. And it's really created, taken the self-regulation approach to emotional intelligence really to the next level. And really in the most basic terms, I would say it's really about understanding that our emotions are technically not tied to external events, even though it seems that if I'm working in a stressful environment, then it's natural that I'm stressed. Or if I'm in a stressful relationship, it's normal that I feel anxiety.
Mm,
However, the technical that's really not what's happening. What happens is events happen and our brain has a perceptual filter of giving that event a meaning. So what we feel is our thoughts about the event, not the
right.
event. So what I tell
Thinking
all my clients
over
is really
time.
about, yeah, it's really about not believing everything you think and just
Mm,
really being patient, because this amazing brain of ours is in the business of prediction. So it predicts what's going to happen based on past experience. And of course, these days, in times of complexity, our brain has not been able to predict anything.
yeah,
And when
it's
this
it's bullseye
happens,
extreme, right?
absolutely. So when this happens, it's literally we're at the edge of this mental map or the edge of the comfort zone that our brain has created, where everything seems outside of it. So our brain goes into overdrive, trying to find another meaning and another meaning. And and this causes a lot of anxiety because, of course, none of our meetings really address the complexity and the vastness of what's really happening, whether in our personal lives, professional lives, or in the geopolitical sphere of things that's happening. So, really, it's really about what everybody else on this panel was saying. Take a breath. Really become the observer of this meaning making machine instead of believing everything that it's projecting out. And eventually, actually, once that reactive meaning making settles down, and by that I mean, our brain is designed, or our ego, our brain is designed to help us look good and make us feel good and others look bad. That's at its basic core. So the first immediate reactive thoughts about a situation are always that they're wrong and I'm right. But
Mm-hmm.
if we just take a breath and not make any of this wrong in any way, because so often we feel ashamed of these reactive thoughts that we have. We feel ashamed of hateful thoughts that we have. But in a way, it's very innocent. It's literally our brain trying to throw everything at the whiteboard to make sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
And as
Mm-hmm.
we take some breaths, as we practice the techniques that Fefalani mentioned. Go outside of the house, interrupt, get out of this overthinking. Eventually, higher level thinking comes forward, thinking that's much more vast. And it's really at the heart of what you said, were saying about Nelson Mandela, that he rose up in these levels of meaning making. And one of the things that we help leaders in the corporate space is to really expand not just their skills, which are kind of the horizontal developments, the skills of effective communication, the skills of decision making, literally pouring information into their cup, as Nick Petrie puts it. But it's really about, let's expand the cup. Let's expand our ability to hold and process the complex data that's bombarding us. And we feel depressed and overwhelmed because our brain is struggling. It doesn't have the mental map. It needs time to expand it. It's literally trying to learn and expand our mental map. But if we get caught up in the depression cycles, we forget the bigger picture of what's happening. And that is, our brain is so resilient and so adaptive. It's trying to grow. But those feelings and experiences of anxiety and depression, if we process them as normal side effects of not knowing, I'm experiencing anxiety because I don't know, and that's okay. That's normal. Give it some time. Nobody knows what tomorrow brings. Literally, we're in this situation where these adaptive skills of being comfortable with the extreme discomfort. And honestly, really, at the end of the day, knowing that my experience of inner wellness is never directly connected with any person or event outside of myself. It's I can't be waiting for these events to settle down so that I settle down. That's a very long waiting game.
Right.
And especially when it comes to really horrifying events that we're experiencing right now in the world, in the global political sphere, which I don't need to get into, our personal lives, COVID. It seems so real to say, I'm shattered, I'm broken because the world is broken. It seems so natural. However, technically, that's so untrue. Our spirit is never broken. What's broken is our mental maps of reality. They're breaking down, which is absolutely okay because it's adding to the database. The mental map is increasing.
Right.
But it
Right.
takes time.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing, particularly as a common thread, is just it's almost like an advanced, evolved self-care where like there's this view of you and then there's you, and almost having that ability to kind of parent and nourish the almost inner child, if I can put it that way, because that is the part of you that responds sometimes prematurely or out of trauma. But that part that's not broken, I suppose, is the part that we also need to kind of elevate and nourish and work on. And I love how you've brought the importance of holding space for even the uncomfortable parts of who we are as well, instead of shaming them. Personally, I went through a period of trying to heal jealousy as a thing. Like it's something that can seem very shameful to even speak about, but imagine even internally just how shameful the storyline can be. And I had to do a lot
The
of brain
shame about the shame. Yes.
right. So I had to do that brain rewiring. And for me, affirmations help with that in terms of I had to say, there's more than enough for all of us. There's more than enough for all of us. And that sort of repetitive affirmation
That
statement
expanded
really
your map.
and
Yes.
up, right. But what if I kind of didn't even know about affirmations? I didn't have any technical set way to heal, which I've now developed after some time going through it. And I was just an everyday person that still wanted to show up in my best self. And that's what I wanted Ubongega to bring in around how does she self-nourish? You produced this body of work, right, during COVID, the heights where people were kind of trying to figure out themselves. And here you are kind of completing this project that you've worked on. From an everyday creator sort of perspective, what were those things that you applied to self nourish yourself and to feed your oasis of who you are as the this oasis, oasis of of well-being, and perhaps that can be useful to the guys on the line just as well.
Yeah, English never loved us, as they often say. Firstly, thank you to Dr. Joy and the Nomalanga Tribe and the Tribe of Healers for affording me this platform. I think, before I get into that, I think it's so important to give the context of Thinking in Full Color, my book. So, Pepelani said something which was very profound around, he had these big questions and he thought, yes, big questions, and he thought that psychology will provide the answers, right? And then he got to psychology and recognized that the not quite. And I think we can all agree here on the line, and those who are listening to us, that life is not so much about the answers, right? Because the answers keep shifting. Years ago, we were told, go to school, get a degree, you're sorted. That answer has shifted, right? So it's almost as if every time the dial keeps shifting. But for me, what I've found, which actually was what birth thinking in full color, was my own journey of asking big questions, and questions for myself, and questions of trying to figure out my life and my positioning in the world and my contribution as an African. So I always like to think of my book as my own metamorphosis, but delivered in this simplistic way. So I guess the full color lens is being able to transform these complex thoughts and complex human experiences into something simple and something that everyone can understand, and sharing my own vulnerabilities, my own stories, my own failures, which is what you will experience when you read my book. It's really that, a collection of questions, a collection of ideas, a collection of conversations, but all of them, the foundation being, I wanted to create a body of work that contributes to making the world a more beautiful place, which I think is the foundation. There's a gentleman that I love, Sir John Hegarty. He always says that great creative work is birthed from what you love. You don't just wake up and create. You create from a place of, I love this, I have a point of view, and I want to share it with the world. And when we touch on and think of, Dr. Nelson Mandela and the resilience for them, and even if you've read historical books, even his long walk to freedom, there were so many crushing moments, but what kept them was they believed in something. They believed in the utopia of a new South Africa. He even says it, this is an ideal I'm willing to die for, right? And I think for me, what a beautiful, there's so much to say, what a beautiful conversation around wellness, one of my favorite topics. And Dr. Joe would have heard me say this, which is something I also talk about in the book. One of my deeply held beliefs around personal wellness is that you can never give off what you're not full of. We live in a time where there's this constant demand on us, intellectually, mentally, physically, in so many factions of our society. And for us to be able to show up in our best versions, you have to be full. As the analogy of fuel, like, even if you were driving my dream car, a Maserati is actually only as powerful as the full tank, right? Because it could be nice, but if it doesn't have the fuel, it's almost its contribution to taking you from A to B is very limited. So I guess my encouragement around a full color lens, for me, it's really that you can never give up what you're full of. But the question becomes, how do we fill up? And I think everybody here has touched on that. So one of the things that I think we don't often talk about, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, is we are constantly chasing this maybe utopia of this ultimate destination of joy or happiness. But what I've found in my own life is, no matter, even if today, right, even if today Oprah can call me and say, hey, let's partner on something, I'll be happy today. But tomorrow I could receive the most traumatic news, because that's life. You're going to be confronted with constant problems. But what I've found is that strength is actually a superpower, and we don't often talk about how strength is integral to human progress. And what I mean by that is inner strength. It's physical strength, it's mental strength, it's emotional strength, it's financial strength. You cannot do anything in this world without some level of strength. No matter how, when I think of physical strength, no matter, I can have the best ideas, but if I'm sick and I'm unwell, hence COVID was such a pivotal moment in human history. You can have the best ideas. You cannot move forward if you're physically not well. We need financial strength. We underestimate the fact that all of us have some element of financial strength. Hence, we can connect using our devices and Wi-Fi and have access to electricity. Those things contribute to you moving forward. There are people who do not have financial strength to even be a part of these conversations. Strength to access opportunities. We are all here because there was a strength in us to be able to access those opportunities, right? So we often underestimate those things, but I think at the bigger, obviously going back to inner strength, for me, it's been, Joy asked me the question, how do I nourish myself? My goodness. And I often say this to my friends and everyone who cares to listen around, it is so important to have a personal, a personal inner time. My favorite time of the day is my alone time. And Dr. Monet touched on it. Sometimes we want to do these big and complex things, but for me, it's as simple as I schedule time with myself. In that time, I think, I pray, I write, and it's a non-negotiable. And I feel it if I go like 2 days or 3 days without having those 30 minutes or an hour, and it may seem like, Mara, this is like simple, but I think the magic is in the simplicity. Because, and I was saying this to Joy, that I was going through a very trying period in my recent project, and what I loved was, and I recognize this a lot when I'm going through a challenge, is my ability to return to my joy. And it's only because I've cultivated a habit of that strength renewal practice. And I think for me, perhaps that will be my full color lens. It's not so much about arriving at a happiness or a joyful state. Of course, you will have those, but it's about cultivating these daily habits that renew your strength. And it depends on the person. I know what works for me, as I said, because I've done this over a period of time, and it's a non-negotiable in my life. And yeah, Dr. Joy, that's perhaps my contribution around how I nourish myself, even as a creative. Because even in creativity, you get. I always say ideas are divine. You get an idea, but what we never talk about in the creative process is this idea of strength renewal, because you can get great ideas, but if you're discouraged, those ideas won't come to life. But what I found works for me is when I continue to incubate this period in my life to just renew my strength in all levels.
Spheres of wellness, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I love touched on the importance of things that we don't even sometimes mention around, like financial wellness and the importance of that as well. So your statement, in summary, while people are putting comments and last questions on the chat, 10 seconds or less, your reimagined statement around then the future of We are busting the myth around there's a set way to heal. What would be your reimagined statement around that, Bonks, in one line?
It's still that you can never give off what you're not full of.
Right.
There's no set will to heal. You define what is healing for you and you contribute to that.
Like you define what is important for you and you
For you.
contribute to that. And I want to go back to Stanley for his final statements while we just wait on the comments if there are any, if you can pick it up in your response. You wanted to talk about just the future of then wellness, as particularly in corporate. If we're saying that wellness only matters when things go wrong in corporate or at work, what would be your reimagined one quick statement around or in response to that myth?
Yeah. So it's moving away from wellness or well-being as a problem to be fixed to, I think all of us have shared this, recognizing the potential and the power in wellness as a proactive foundation for good life, both individually and in the workplace.
Right. So wellness is the foundation and the center of a good life. And Noosh, in response to your myth that you were busting and responding to the fact that wellness is not external to us, what would be your reimagined statement around that myth?
That the complexities of our life today really require us to bring our inherent wellness, our inherent genius that's lasted through thousands and thousands of years, really bringing that to the forefront and not taking any of our thoughts and emotions really as the final word. It's never the final word. And our thoughts can never really grasp the reality of what's happening.
Right. I love it. You're not what you think. And you,
Yeah.
Pepelani, around just certain challenges being sort of more severe than others. How would you bust that myth and reimagine it?
Yeah, I normally like to say that well-being or happiness is a particular way of thinking, of doing, and simply of being. You know, um, and it's not a place that you arrive at. You know, and it's important for us to understand that it's not a place that you arrive with at. It's a way. It's more of a lifestyle. It's more of a how we walk out every day journey, in how we engage life in
Mm.
everyday simple. Um,
Thank
yeah.
you, Pepelani. And finally, Dr. Monet, your point around wellness being something being only about managing illness. How would you reimagine that myth for us in closing?
Well, understand that you're immensely powerful. So show up with what you have and connect.
Hmm. I like that very much. And there's comments on the line. I'm sorry we've gone so far over time, but there's comments around loving the gas and fuel metaphor. There's comments around obviously this tapping into quite an insightful conversation for Charlene. And then Zena Height mentions that it's quite powerful ideas and concepts. My faith in humanity is slowly being restored. And I think on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that's a very high note for me to end off the evening with. We will definitely be resharing the live for the guys that couldn't join with us this evening and continue the conversation on the chat. I have at least 6 people that can respond to any comments and questions on the line. And we look forward to just hosting more of these and holding space, authentic space for more of these conversations. I'm sorry that we couldn't get through the whole thing for today, but this is only the beginning. and look out for our next invite where we actually play around with actual things like our breathing resets that Monet mentioned around grounding yourself, which is something that we look forward to sort of exercising and intertwining with you on, particularly online, and tapping into that power as well that Pipilani mentioned. So have a great evening, and if you're in South Africa, have a great day. If you are in New Zealand or South California, and anywhere else in the world, we appreciate that we are able to spend time with you guys, and we look forward to chatting more about this topic.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Joy.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.